All right, y'all, it's a few minutes before 12. If you can hear my voice, uh, then, introduce yourself in the chat. Say hello. And if you want to share where you're from as well, that's always cool. I'm always curious where people call home, whatever that means. I do want to apologize. It seems like on the LinkedIn event, even though all of the images and social media posts referenced 12 p.m. Eastern, apparently when I set it up, either I messed up or it messed up to post it at 10 a.m. Eastern. And so I don't know if I accidentally hit Pacific time or something. But thank you all for being here at noon Eastern. Hi, Lindsay, in the chat. That's in the chat over in our studio, but I'm guessing, Lindsay, you might be able to hear me. So, can anybody on LinkedIn hear me? Can you already hear me at this point? Chicagoland. Oh my gosh, Amy. It's been a while, Amy. Saw pictures of the green of the river turned green over there. Um, I got to tell you, Amy, and you'll get this going back to, I don't know what year that was, 2012 or 13 or 11 or something. But I just showed my younger son the Truman Show recently, and I think you and I had some interesting thoughts about the Truman Show. Anyone else in the chat? Let me know that you're here. Tell me where you're from, and we will get started just a couple minutes after 12 because I want to be aware of our time, but also let people log in. By the way, if you're logged in on LinkedIn, at the bottom there's a little icon, and I'll show it to you. If you look there on the screen, you see there's invite, react, raise. And so the invite, while we're waiting, if you're already on, invite some friends or share it on your LinkedIn, get the word out. I think that we all need more emotionally intelligent management. I think we can get better at being emotionally intelligent leaders. I think many of our managers can improve in that regard as well. So, while we're waiting to get started, go to that little bottom right side of your LinkedIn and hit that little arrow button and invite a few people, because we want to have as many people in the conversation as we can. Can other folks besides Amy hear me? Just doing a microphone check, making sure that people can hear me, because I see on LinkedIn that we've got 35 and growing people in the space, but so far I don't see much in the chat, and so I just want to make sure that we are good to go. So if you are here, at least give me a thumbs up in the chat that you can hear me, so that we can go. Largo, Florida. Awesome. I've heard of that place. One of my best friends on the planet lives there. Abigail says you can hear me. Great. Thanks, Abigail. Dayton, Ohio. Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Anna, great. John, fantastic. Welcome back, John. I think several of you were in our last webinar on emotional intelligence and personality type. Alex, what's up from Golden, Colorado? I should say good morning to you then, over in Golden, Colorado. Fantastic. Good to know that I'm heard. It is 12 o'clock. We will wait about 2 minutes for people to get on. And like I said, in the bottom right corner of your LinkedIn, press that little invite button and invite some people. Oh, Waterbury, Connecticut. Another one of my best friends on the planet lives in Waterbury, Connecticut. What? Atlanta. Hey, Dara. Lexington, Kentucky. Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. I drive through Lexington every summer as I traverse from North Carolina to Indianapolis. So we go through Lexington, Louisville, that whole stretch, the mountains. It's beautiful over there. Yeah. Again, we'll give it just another minute to let people get on, and then we are going to get into this conversation about building emotional intelligence, managing up and managing down. By the way, I do want to keep the chat active. My awesome rock star of a virtual assistant, Lindsay, is helping me manage that. But at any point, if I'm going through the slideshow and you have questions, comments, thoughts, let me know, because I'm sure that collectively we have a lot more wisdom about managing up and managing down than I do individually. So always feel free to chime in on the conversation. All right. And with that said, one final push. If anybody wants to click the little invite button in the bottom right corner and invite some people, invite them away. Otherwise, let's get started. I know some of you probably attended the last webinar, so I'm not going to do quite as lengthy of an introduction, but a brief introduction. My name's Alan Mueller. I use he, him pronouns. I have a doctorate in leadership. I'm certified in the use of the Myers-Briggs. I do keynote speeches. Part of why I think they're engaging is because also I'm a former improv comedian. My team with Adaptive Challenge Consulting, we do workshops online, in person, with all kinds of sectors: technology, city government, county government, municipalities, K-12, higher education, nonprofits, etc., on a wide range of leadership topics, including equity and inclusion topics, communication topics, embodied leadership, stage presence, all kinds of things. So that's a little bit about me. A few more things that make me me. That 7 and that 2.16 up there, I share liberally, because 7 was the amount of years it took me to finish college the first time, and 2.16 was my GPA. And I'm not going to tell the whole story or my regular joke, but suffice it to say that we are all imperfect and have had imperfect journeys, and I'm sharing that lest you believe that I was Dr. Mueller when I was 10 years old, and lest you believe that I'm some kind of complete, totally not messy human. I love Disney World. As a matter of fact, I'm going there in just a few days. I'm also a big time artist. I play trombone, I sing, and that's a little bit about me. So if you were in my last session, then you'll know this graphic well. This graphic on the screen, I want everybody to pay attention to the magnifying glass that's looking at the FedEx logo. Whenever I go do keynote speeches, whenever I go do presentations, overwhelmingly, about 1/4 to 1/3 of most audiences in front of which I stand does not know until I tell them that in the negative space between the E and the X is an arrow. And so for some of you, if you were in my last session, then you probably remember this. Many of you maybe already knew this, but I'm guessing about 1/4 of you, about 25%, all the way up to about 33%, have never observed that arrow until now. If you want to be brave and mention in the comments that you've never seen it till right now, that would be amazing, because it would prove to people that I know what I'm talking about. But essentially, that's one of those things that after you've noticed it, there is no more unnoticing it ever, right? Sometimes I say see it. Not everybody is a sighted person, and so but the first time you observe it, it's there, and then you will never ever be able to unobserve it, right? And so if you get a package from FedEx, if you see a truck on the highway of FedEx, you're going to forevermore see it once you've been introduced to it, right? That's part of the goal of this session, is for you to come away with this session with some ideas that you didn't have before, but ideas that you'll not just be able to shake, ideas that you won't just be able to put down and give up, ideas that will stay with you, kind of like this FedEx arrow. And when I do have people in the audience who have never seen the arrow, and they do see the arrow, oftentimes if I see them again in town or online, they're like, I see the arrow everywhere, right? And so it's about gaining perspectives that you don't previously have, that you can't ungain. So that's my invitation to you. Here's our agenda: introduction, a note about intersecting identities, what emotional intelligence is, which is going to be a review if you were in our last session, but I'm going to speed it up a little bit. Management, managing up, upcoming webinars and courses, building your management skills before you're a manager, and that's sort of time permitting. We'll see how we go conversation-wise from there, and then we'll do some Q&A. So we'll be a little flexible towards the end of our agenda. A real quick note about intersecting identities, and my sessions, we always do this because throughout our conversation, sometimes the fact that we have different identities will come up. One identity that is mine is I'm white, right? Another is I'm a man. Another is I'm not currently physically disabled. And so these are some things that make me me, and they go with me everywhere I go. I cannot leave the house one day and just be white and not be man, or just be man and not be white. All of my intersecting identities come with me. Now, not all of them are apparent to my community, but some of them are, or some of them our community takes good guesses on. But as we talk about management, we're not managing in a vacuum, my friends. In other words, every person who manages, every person who's managed is experiencing race, is experiencing gender, is experiencing ability status, is experiencing all kinds of things that make us us. So as those things arise, we'll talk about it because we have to if we want to manage with emotional intelligence. One example, and I gave a different example in our last session about resting Mitch face with an M. And if you want to know about that, watch the YouTube video from the last session. But so since we're talking about management, many times I've gone through evaluations or annual assessments, whether I'm managing other people or being managed. And the word unprofessional gets used from time to time, right? Unprofessional. And and oftentimes dominant cultures will present a word like unprofessional, an adjective, as though it's sort of culture neutral, as though it's just sort of like an impartial, not subjective thing. However, we know that what's deemed professional is norms based on the people who ran companies for a long, long time. And so, in other words, overwhelmingly in the United States at least, it's been white men who have set the norms on what's professional and what's not professional. If you think about how we are encouraged to dress, how we are encouraged to speak, how we are encouraged to communicate, all kinds of things are sort of done in a framework of people who have historically and still currently have all or most of the power to shape what professional is and isn't. There was a great commercial on LinkedIn about 4 years ago that I loved, and it had people with hair that would have made my boomer parents cringe, right? Or face piercings or other things like that. That and they kept saying, "I am professional. I'm professional. I'm professional," and they were trying to disrupt this notion that professional was one model, i.e., the model most comfortable to power structures, be that whiteness, be that manness, be that all the other things that make us us, but historically, who's been in the most power. Unprofessional, universal, and friendly are not universally defined. I have found that in previous jobs. Oh my gosh, yes, yes, John. So that's an invitation, and you're invited to participate in this conversation in whatever level is safest for you, because I know everybody on this call also has intersecting identities. So, real quick, emotional intelligence, at least in the colonized Western literature, Gardner, Solovey and Mayer, and Goldman sort of brought it into U.S. Academia. This is not an academic webinar, but I just want to give a little nod. Here are some different models of what we mean by emotional intelligence. I'm not going to stay on this slide because I think many of you probably attended my last event, but I will point to this and say some of these are sort of alliterative, like the third column, conscientious, compassion, and connectedness. One of them is a great acronym. The second column, leaders, LEADERS, listening, equipping, appreciation, developing, enlisting, relationships, and service. So there are a lot of different models in terms of what is encapsulated by emotional intelligence. But I went through and kind of found the best and the themes. And then I also took it through a lens of racial justice and decolonization. And this is the list that I have. If you were at my last session, I've added one thing to the list that wasn't on the last list. As I prepared for today, I thought I should have put authenticity on this list, and I didn't. And now it's here. And we're going to interrogate it and talk about it in a minute. But this is my current evolving list of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, empathy, intercultural competency, listening, communication, social navigation skills, growth or the yet mindset, and authenticity. That's my current list. It is evolving. But I'm going to bring that icon back, that DEI icon back, and put some asterisks next to some of this. Because self-awareness overwhelmingly with groups that I work with, and I consult with a lot of different groups in a lot of different sectors, one of the biggest challenges is people that come from more privileged identities struggle the most with self-awareness because most of their environments have been sort of built around their comfort, convenience, norms, etc. And so there hasn't been much need. There hasn't been another culture against which they're comparing themselves. So I wanted to mention that intercultural competency is huge. I'm going to show you some data from the Harvard Business Review later about how intercultural competency has grown in importance in the last decade, in particular in our workspaces. Social navigation skills. Some people call this like emotional navigation skills, but I call them social navigation skills because I recognize that all of our office spaces have power imbalances. They do, and some of this has to do with who is a manager and who's not. Some of this has to do with power structures that have to do with privilege. One client I work with is an amazing organization, and their CEO is a woman. And my experience of that organization is that overwhelmingly it's steeped in sort of patriarchal ideas of management and leadership. And so that's to say that they may have a person in leadership who normally would be held at arm's length, but they're still managing a system that has some very deep roots. And so social navigation skills is a nod to the fact that every system we're in, every workplace we're in, has systems that have been established by people in power. You can slice and dice that lots of ways, and we all have to navigate it, and the navigating is different for different ones of us depending on our relationship to that power. And then authenticity. And I'll say this one with an asterisk because I invite us to be as authentic as we can be. And I say can be because the price for authenticity is different for different people. And I do improv comedy, and I work with some groups with improv comedy. And when I'm about to get a bunch of people who wear suits and ties to work to come in and do improv games, I have to acknowledge that the price of being silly for me is probably lower than the price of being silly for women in that workspace, who might feel like if they get silly here, there might be other kinds of consequences in terms of their reputation, what people think, and then you can multiply that times race or time ability status, etc. The things that make us us. And so when I say be as authentic as you can, that's just me trying to acknowledge that not all spaces are conducive, safe, affirming for all of who we are. And so, my invitation is to be as authentic as you're able. So how do people become managers? One of the things I've learned about management theory and technique is this really cool thing called the Peter Principle. I don't know if anybody's heard of the Peter Principle. If you have, raise your hand in the chat. People who go through an MBA often study this concept. The concept is that maybe you're in an organization in which there are 20 assistant managers and one manager. And those 20 assistant managers are customer facing. So those assistant managers are very, very facing towards the client of the business or organization. The manager is doing more back office things, doing timesheets, doing payroll, managing the different assistant managers and all the things that are involved there. One of the things that the Peter Principle talks about is the idea that you might be the best assistant manager ever because you have the skill set needed to be an assistant manager, which is, again, patron, customer, client facing, student facing, etc. But that the skill set needed to be a manager is a much different skill set. And that oftentimes the best assistant manager gets promoted to become a manager without a lot of thinking as to whether or not that person has the skills needed to be a manager. They had the perfect skill set to be an assistant manager, but the skill set to be a manager is different. And so the Peter Principle is this idea that each of us has sort of a maximum spot in our organization for which our skill set is suited. I do push back a little on this because we can continue to build skills. That's why you're here in this webinar. We can continue to build skills. However, I knew when I worked in colleges and universities that when I got to be an assistant dean, that was the sweet spot for me because I still got to be somewhat client facing, in that case, student facing, and I got to do some management, but the variety kept me going. And I knew that the next level up, that the dean level in that case, was going to be something that I could build skill towards, but was not my natural skill set. So the Peter Principle is the idea that sometimes the manager that you might have got promoted because they were the best at doing the stuff that everyone they supervise is doing, but doing the stuff and managing the people doing the stuff are two different skill sets, right? How do people become managers? They become managers based on their perception or potential of achievement, right? Do others perceive them as having potential, or do others perceive them as having achievement? And then the power structures that reinforce each other. Here again, a little bit of an intersecting identity moment. I had a client that I worked with 180 staff, and one of the things that came out loudly and clearly in that team was that in their organization, at least, men were promoted because of their potential, women were promoted because of their achievement. And so this was a sentiment that I heard from multiple people throughout the organization. And that reality stuck with me, right? That was a deeply held perception by many, many people. And so that speaks to, male privilege, right? That men are evaluated by, well, do we think he could, whereas women in that organization were overwhelmingly being evaluated by has she demonstrated, right? And then the power structures that reinforce each other. I've never in my life played golf, but my perception is always that there's a bunch of the upper level managers of all of our organizations out somewhere playing golf, and I'm just not a golf person, and I don't have proximity to that. I do have proximity to whiteness because I'm white, and manness because I'm a man, and other things that privilege me. But sometimes the power structures transcend that or go across lines where I have difference in socioeconomics or other cultural differences. And so this is often how people become managers. I'm going to keep us moving a little bit. Real quick, I can't do this without drawing this distinction. And so I get asked by clients all the time to do management training. And I very, very quickly say, I will do management training, but if we don't first do leadership training, we are not going to get far. Management is very behavior based and it is very standard operating procedure oriented. Leadership has to do with motivation, understanding, empathy, all the things that we mean when we are leaning into emotional intelligence. So here's a little list that managing the goals are exclusively on efficiency and productivity. People are considered resources, critical in the industrial revolution, right? So when the industrial revolution was happening and our primary challenge was how can we make cars in the most efficient way or cheeseburgers in the most efficient way, managing was very important. It assumes behaviorism. If any of you studied some psychology in high school or college, behaviorism is just punishment and reward. That humans are essentially animals, and that if we get rewarded through bonuses, through pay raises, etc., or if we get punished through being written up, through being chastised, whatever, that those are the things that are going to get us to be more productive or efficient, right? Because again, that's the goal of management. Leadership, on the other side, the goals of the organization are on the radar, just like with managers, but the goals of those they serve and those who work towards this are all mapped and they're all valuable. So your organization's shareholders, sure, but then also your customers or clients or students, and then also your coworkers and colleagues, right? So all of these things are mapped to in a way to understand that all of these things need to be grown and developed, right? That it's not just the profit, it's not just the shareholder. Leading recognizes the human dignity of all people involved. And so I've spent a lot of time with Quakers, and Quakers talk about the inner light, and just the reminder that each person that you're working with, even the difficult manager you don't like, and we're going to get to that in a little bit, it is deserving of human dignity. Sometimes that's a tall order and hard to see in others or observe in others. The leading became more critical in the information age. In the 1980s, employability became a lot more portable as retirement accounts and COBRA and healthcare got portable between organizations, which was a really neat thing that we take for granted now, I think. But in the information age, leading is more important, and it assumes developmentalism and that fostering growth is always a goal. Developmentalism is metaphorically the FedEx arrow I showed you, which is after you've seen the arrow, you can never unsee it. In our previous workshop, we talked about extroversion and introversion, and maybe you're an extrovert who learned something about introverts that you can never unlearn, and that's going to shape how you interact with other introverts. And so that's a developmental process, not a behavioral process. A behavioral process is me saying, extroverts, you need to be more quiet for the first 2 minutes of the meeting. And then if you do that, you'll be rewarded. And if you don't do it, you'll be punished. That's behaviorist. Developmental is listening to introverts, doing an activity about introversion, understanding it and going, and then having an internal thinking process of, I wonder if I should proceed differently now that I have this new lens, this new idea, now that I've seen the FedEx arrow. So leading assumes that all of us are developing, right? Managing assumes that behaviorism is the way to get stuff done the efficient and productive way. So I wanted to mention that. So I mentioned the Harvard Business Review. I hope you can see this, but I'm going to highlight it verbally, and LinkedIn will have the captions. So these are some traits from a piece, Sylvia Ann Hewlett, from February of this year from the Harvard Business Review about leadership presence. And so this is broken down into gravitas, communication, and appearance. I want to draw your attention to this. I just highlighted, by the way, just as a review, at the top of the screen, you see sort of my current evolving list of emotional intelligence characteristics that I showed you earlier. And if you want a little more detail, you can watch the video from the last webinar. And I want to map those onto what we're seeing on this chart. This chart is showing that there's a survey in 2012 And then another one 10 years later. And how have things evolved? And things have evolved in terms of gravitas traits, communication traits, and appearance traits. That first one, gravitas traits, I want to just draw a huge distinction there. You'll notice the fourth one down, the fourth characteristic down in the 2012 survey is emotional intelligence. And then you'll notice that on 2022, emotional intelligence isn't there, but inclusiveness, respect for others is suddenly there. And so if you look at our list up top, what this is saying to me is that our understanding of what's encompassed within emotional intelligence is becoming increasingly important. And saying emotional intelligence by itself without defining it and exploring it isn't getting us there, right? And so now emotional intelligence is more needed than ever, but I think it's showing up in terms of its components rather than just a blanket statement. Similarly, if you look at the communication traits, you'll see listen to learn orientation, which we'll talk about in a little bit, authenticity. You see that also in the appearance traits, authenticity, and the new normal style of dress. I mentioned that really cool LinkedIn commercial from a few years back, challenging what sort of establishment cultures had deemed professional. And I love how cool that LinkedIn commercial was. But it spoke to what do we wear at work? Who's defining that, and can we think differently about that? I think it was within the last 10 years that the United States military finally sanctioned the ability of Black people to wear their hair naturally, which is one of the most stinging indictments you can think of in terms of sort of how power structures define what's professional, right? That the hair that grows out of some of their service members' heads naturally had to be a certain way for them to serve in the military, which that always bugged me. And there is progress, albeit late, but this speaks to that as well, the new normal style of dress, and I'm thankful that we're moving that way. So let's talk about managing up. Managing up. Okay, first of all, managing up is uncompensated labor, y'all. It's uncompensated labor. Very rarely in a job description does it say part of your job is to teach your manager how to be better. Very rarely does it say that. And so understand that it is unpaid labor. Because we are intersectional in our conversations with Adaptive Challenge Consulting, I'll say that for many of you, unpaid labor is just a way of life. You're used to doing that. For some of you, it might not be, and it might be extra frustrating. And just know that you're in good company, because in my experience, at least, all growing up, whenever race came up in a class, all of my white teachers would turn to my Black classmates to say, hey, can you give us your experience? Can you teach us, etc., for free, because I don't know what to talk about. Or when talking about sexual orientation, turning to the gay community to be the teachers of that. And so overwhelmingly, in my experience, I've always watched people who don't deal with the isms turn to the people who are dealing with the isms to teach about these things. And that's unpaid labor as well, and uncompensated labor. And so for many of you on this call, uncompensated labor might be a part of life. For some of you, especially if you share a lot of privileged identities with me, it might be less comfortable. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't lean into it and lean in hard, because we're going to talk about how we can do that to help each other as well. But know that managing is uncompensated labor. And so because of that, we have to do the cost benefit evaluation, right? I have been in situations, and I would love to hear people in the chat about this as well. I've been in situations where I've seen enough potential in the manager and or believed I was going to be there long enough that the uncompensated labor I knew was worth it. Or I had colleagues who didn't have quite the proximity to power that I had. And even though I didn't deem it worth it for me, quote unquote, I deemed it worth it for us, and decided to put in that time and energy, not for my benefit, but for our collective benefit and for the person who's going to be in the seat after me, right? To build the management system in a way that's more emotionally intelligent and inclusive. And so in that instance, so sometimes the calculation is, yes, it's worth it. And other times the calculation is, no, maybe it's not worth it, at which time you might want to find colleagues who can pitch in, who can tag team, right? But understand that managing is uncompensated labor. For many of you, that's a part of life. For others of you, it might be new. If it feels newer, that means do it more. That means do it more. The Peter Principle, power structures, lack of future leader training programs uphold this need. So what I mean by this is so many managers struggle because the Peter Principle, which we talked about, They don't quite have the skill set to be a manager. They were the best assistant manager because they had that skill set, but they're not the best manager. um, the power structures, i.e., so and so plays golf with so and so's mom is a trustee at your university or college, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Proximity to power structures, but then also the lack of future leader training. With Adaptive Challenge Consulting, we get called in pretty frequently with organizations to work with their leadership, work with their managers. That's probably the number one group we work with. And every time that happens, I pause and say to those folks, who are your future managers? Who are your up and coming managers? Because I cannot tell you how many times I go in and do a training, and it's a 2 day long training or it's a 3 hour training, and managers come up to me and say, I wish I had known this 5 years ago, right? We don't typically we typically train managers on the job, right? And that causes problems. So one of the reasons that managing up has to happen is because people are thrown into this situation, Peter Principle wise. They play golf with someone, or they're the daughter of a trustee or something like that, um, and they have not had future leader training before getting in that role. So future leader training is critical. So the organizations you're part of, I'm sure that your managers are getting some professional development. Um, but the question is, who's your next generation of managers? Please clarify again your definition of uncompensated labor. Yes, Beth, uncompensated labor is I'm doing work and I'm not getting paid for it, and I'm not getting evaluated for it. If my job has 10 job duties, and those duties have to do with client management, portfolio management, whatever, if it's in an education, student achievement, whatever, typically a bullet will not be teach your manager how to be a better manager. That is I've never seen that really, except for a few transitional positions, but I've never seen that really. And so when I say uncompensated labor, what I mean is that if you have a manager that needs some managing up, if they are still learning to be a manager on the job in ways that aren't good for the team, then part of your job to make your environment better becomes managing up, and you're not getting paid extra for that. You're not getting evaluated on how well you do that. I hope that makes sense, Beth. Thank you for the question. But yeah, future leader training is critical. So in your organizations, be thinking about future leader training. That's huge. And then also, we each have to decide how much managing up capacity we have to do. So many different factors about our identities that dictate how much spare energy we have to give back. And so because of that, I think I have because of that, I have a little note here. The note says, to the degree that you have more privileged identities, I invite you to take a leadership role in managing up. In other words, I was in a scenario recently where most of the people at my management level and the management level just below me, everyone on those other two levels were all women. And I think 7 of the 9 were women of color. I was the only man at that level of management, and I was and I was one of very few white people, right? And so because I had some things easier because of those things, because of my whiteness and my manness, because I had those things, I felt like if we had a manager that needed managing up, which we did at some point as a team, that it's more my job to help with that, because in the sort of who's spending the most uncompensated labor, it's not me, right? I'm not doing the most uncompensated labor already to fight the isms in my organization. And so the question is, can I put in more when it comes to managing up? So that's an invitation to you all. And we may share privilege across a lot of different ways. We might share privilege in that we all have access to the internet right now, right? Or that you might share whiteness with me, or manness with me, or temporarily able-bodiedness with me, or neurotypicalness with me, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever it is you share with me, that's where I invite you to use that privilege to offset the labor of the people on the other end of those equations, right? So in the differently abled community, if managers are making decisions and someone's like, well, what about ramps for people that need hardware to get into the space? And they're like, yeah, don't worry about it. You're like, well, hold on. I don't need a ramp. So I'm going to worry about it extra so that the person who does need a ramp doesn't need to worry about it, right? So that's what I mean by that invitation. So we're about to get a little interactive, so get ready to chime in a little bit. But I want to ask you all, so I've broken managers into 4 categories here. And this is largely based on some reading I've done in management by Maxwell, by some of it from The World is Flat by Thomas Friedman and others, to kind of, and then also my personal experience as someone who's been managed and managed, and then also um, a lot of the clients I work with, and so my observation of these clients over time. And I've sort of broken things into the invested manager, the average manager, the ego driven manager, and the toxic manager. And so the invested manager is already demonstrating emotional intelligence. They're invested in their team members, they're invested in the company, they're invested in whoever the company serves, whether it's clients, customers, students, whatever you call those you serve. The average manager, most typically driven by organizational goals and building a personal resume or portfolio, most typically, and that's the way a lot of people, a lot of managers are acculturated, right? That's sort of how we're taught. Um, Christy, an email with this slide deck, not with this slide deck, but this video is being recorded and will be posted later on our website over at adaptivechallengeconsulting.com. Good question, Christy. The ego-driven manager, transactional in nature, focused on their own achievement at the expense of other goals. I'm sure many of you know this type of person. And then the toxic manager. Typically, they're playing out trauma, narcissism, and other destructive traits throughout the organization, seemingly for no reason. There are, of course, lots and lots and lots of reasons. So I am going to step off of the screen for 60 seconds to get some apples, get some apple chips. And in those 60 seconds, I would invite you all to ask yourself and put in the chat ideas. Looking at that list of emotionally intelligent qualities at the top: self-awareness, empathy, intercultural competency, listening, communication, social navigation skills, growth mindset, and authenticity. When thinking about that, I would love for you to come up with an idea for each of these categories of managers. How could you use those qualities to manage up to an average manager, manage up to an ego-driven manager, manage up to a toxic manager? So that is my question for discussion. Give me 60 seconds, put some things in the chat. I'll be right back. I am back. Let's see what's in the chat. If anybody has ideas. I think there's a slight delay with LinkedIn, so I'm going to relax for just a moment. Again, the invitation is, what is something you may have tried or you think you could try, employing empathy or listening or growth mindset or self-awareness or authenticity to manage up to these different styles of managers? I see Julianne says social navigation skills and listening. Listen to them. Ask questions rather than give speeches. Yes, ask questions. And Julianne, I've got a slide coming up about two distinct styles of questions that we can ask. But yeah, definitely ask questions. Sharing resources and learning you have done that could value the organization. Yes, yes. And so some folks, like the ego-driven manager and the toxic manager, they may think that they have nothing to learn, which is ironic because they are probably the group that has the most to learn, right? And so, Eileen, to your comment, modeling for them what it's like to engage in other resources for your own growth and development may stoke something in there. So definitely mentorship. Aubrey, I'd love to hear more about what you mean by mentorship, but I think that when you're managing up, I think there most certainly can and have been times when I've been mentored by someone that I'm supervising. And I think there might have even been one time in my career that a colleague shared with me later that I was mentoring her, even though she was my supervisor. So that can happen across sort of the power dynamics and the org chart. Alex, initially start with empathy. Yes, 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 yes. Let them show up more like average. Oh, glimpses of being invested, but organizational circumstances have led them to show up more like average or ego-driven managers. It's important for me to assume positive intent and communicate what I expect of them and trust that they want to. Alex, I feel like you were looking at my slides because you're going to see that's like a preview for my slides. Beth, I want to get to your comment in 1 second. But yes, Alex, one of the things, I don't know if you see on the toxic manager side, um, it says plays out personal trauma. One of my colleagues in adaptive challenge consulting, Dr. Kelly Dixon, she says that all of us have experienced trauma on some level. And so oftentimes some of the abusive managers are doing that because they have experienced some trauma. And we forget that. We forget that. Now, is it necessarily our job to help them with that? No. Is it uncompensated labor? Yes. Is there risk? Yes. But if we can remember that, we might be being more developmental even than they might be capable of. And there could be great benefit for them and for us and for our organization. Servant leadership. Yes, Beth, by demonstrating servant leadership that can model for managers, particularly if managers are in those far two right columns, the ego-driven manager for whom service only counts if you're getting credit, and the toxic manager as well. And yeah, acknowledge different types of management. I'm reading John's comment now. Then if I can meet the managers where they are, and where I need growth to do my best in that relationship. Yes. One of the things I like about John's comment, and this speaks to a lot of the work I do with the Myers-Briggs, is that oftentimes when there's a manager and someone they manage, and someone they manage has a problem with the manager, first of all, personality type is a real thing, y'all. It's a real thing. And there are many, many, many introverted supervisors with extroverted supervisees, and those extroverted supervisees just think that their managers don't communicate enough. Some of that's personality. But then also there is gender. Also there is race. Also there are these other things. And so the thing that I like about what John is saying is John saying, hey, kind of like, I wonder what's going on with them, and I wonder what's going on with me as I approach them, right? I'm a Gen X person who historically kind of just had problems with authority to begin with. So all of my managers I was a little tough on initially, right? And I had to learn to check myself some about how much of that was me projecting my Gen X ruggedness or whatever it is that I was doing, right? So thanks for sharing those. Let me see. Here are some of the ideas, some practical tips that I've given. Don't take things personally until they are. Sometimes we take things too personally from managers, and sometimes managers are more overwhelmed than we think. I had a good friend named Patrick, and we started a leadership institute for future managers that was adopted by a professional association. It was a great thing. It was called the NCACE Leadership Institute. And one of the things that we talked about was that being a leader can be lonely. The manager who is managing you, they might be a little lonely. And so, John, that's a good question. I'll get to that in a second. And so, like, I've been on teams before where it's 5 o'clock and everybody's like, "Yeah, we're going to a restaurant after work," and Alan, come on. And then a year later, I'm the manager. Like, Alan, we're going to a restaurant. See you tomorrow. Like, stop being invited because you're the manager. And so management and leadership can be lonely. So use that knowledge to reinforce that first bullet point. Don't take things personally until they are. Do your own work on your own culture and approach other cultures with curiosity, right? Interrogate your own cultures, right? One of the things I do in workshops is I ask people, what's something funny about your culture, especially a culture that privileges you, right? So one of the things I think is hilarious is that most of my fellow white people, for some reason, are okay letting dogs lick them on the mouth. And for some reason, I'm not okay with that. And I do not understand that. But I feel like it's part of my culture. And I think it's very funny, right? And so understanding my own culture, but then approaching other cultures, not with stereotypes, but with curiosity. I want to learn more about this culture. I want to learn more that my colleagues from India, when they want to signal that they agree, they don't nod like this. This is agreement, right? If you're in India. And this goes back to one of the comments earlier about asking questions. And I'm going to give you two kinds of questions that are ideal for I think, demonstrating emotional intelligence while managing up. One's the open-ended question, which is to seek understanding. And you saw that in one of the earlier slides, right? Ask with seeking to understand, right? Can you help me understand why this task is given to me and not this other person? Can you help me understand why you said this on my last performance review? Can you help me understand? Can you help me understand? Which, if you hear the tone that I'm doing this with, I'm doing this in a way to try to not take things too personally, to sort of be outside of yourself a little bit. And this is hard. It takes confidence because a lot of us are very much a lot of our worth comes from our work. Um, so open-ended questions to seek understanding, but particularly with those managers who are more ego-driven, excuse me, or more on the toxic side, asking uh, dichotomous questions to clarify paths forward, right? And what this is doing is it's asking managers, okay, between this and this, where should I focus my energy next? Oftentimes, managers will give you a 10th, 11th, and 12th project. You haven't even finished the first four. And so, understanding that it is entirely reasonable in a managing up emotional in an emotionally intelligent way to say, okay, of this new duty that I have, how does that affect where that places the priority of my other duties, right? These dichotomous things. There was a philosopher named Hegel who came up with this really cool concept called the Hegelian dialectic. And essentially, and you can use this as a leader in good conscience. Essentially, if you get one group arguing about one group that loves asphalt and they're building a new road to St. Louis, and they are team asphalt, and another group that's team concrete, and you're like, well, when we build our road to St. Louis, y'all have to advocate for concrete, y'all have to advocate for asphalt. They fight and fight and fight, and no one questions that we're building a road to St. Louis. No one questions that it's not Chicago, or that it's not Raleigh, or that it's not DC, right? And so the dichotomous questions, especially with ego-driven managers or toxic managers, can, are needed for when the action plan is important, right? So, dear manager, you just gave me this extra thing. I've asked some questions about seeking to understand. Now that we need a course of action, I'm going to ask some questions to clarify the path forward, right? So if you need me to focus on this, which of these other projects should I pause in the short term until we can get it back, right? And sometimes that conversation, and I hope you can rewind this if you're watching this on the video, can remind managers that we are not each sort of unlimited wells of work, right? That we have limits in terms of our hours. Seek to understand personality type. And so, shameless plug here. I'm giving too much away there, but seek to understand personality type. I've got a course up now, which is amazing, an amazing course on how to use the Myers-Briggs personality type to increase our emotional intelligence. And so, understanding personality type can help you so much between a manager and a managee. So much. There's so much understanding that can be built. And so I do have that course. And right now I'm turning 50 next week, y'all. And so I'm doing the course for 50% off. There's a coupon code. And I don't know if Lindsay's in the chat. Oh, look at that. There's the code, I think, to the course, I believe. And then the coupon right now is called half off, and it's good through the end of March because it's my 50th birthday next week. So seek to understand personality type. Tell your manager about your professional needs. And again, somebody mentioned that earlier in the comments, is like, here are things that I want from a professional environment. Here are things I need from a professional environment. And notice I'm talking about things I want and things I need. They might be different. I need X, Y, and Z, and I would like A, B, and C as well. And so demonstrating to a supervisor, a manager, delineating that is demonstrating some emotional intelligence. You've gone through the emotional intelligent process of discerning a need in a way that's different from a want, and you're presenting it accordingly. And that can signal to managers you've already done some work on establishing which is which. And then the last one, acknowledging your manager's humanity. This is tough when we have bad managers. It's tough. And it's tough because they can impact our self-worth, our self-esteem, our joy at work. They can impact us in lots of ways. But acknowledge that they are people, right? And as the Quakers say, they are endowed with the light. They have the light within them. So I want to show you this. This is, again, a shameless plug for my course. It's a great course. It's self-paced. It's about 6 hours, but you get a really in-depth look at the Myers-Briggs and how that can help you be in a more emotionally intelligent significant other, partner, worker, manager, all these kinds of things. But I wanted to show you the colors here, and I hope most of you can see the colors, but I've mapped some of the emotional intelligence components from up top with some of those suggestions that I just gave. So in the second bullet point, you'll see that I highlighted your own culture, exploring your own culture, especially when that culture is not questioned or marginalized. What is the culture of temporarily able-bodied people? What are cultural things? Do you have standing meetings in your office? You use the phrase standing meetings, right? Which means a meeting we're going to have regularly. But for people who don't stand, can we interrogate that, right? Can we ask questions about our own culture? Asking open-ended questions to seek understanding. Your manager, that person is probably trying to do their best. They may be failing, they may be struggling. They're probably trying to do their best. That might be dismaying for some of you, but they are. And if you're a manager, or if you're going to be a manager in the near future, you're going to be trying your best too. And so acknowledging their humanity is separate from assessing their effectiveness as a manager, separate from managing up to help them build their emotional intelligence as well. But acknowledging their humanity is separate from that, but it's still important. Um, the dichotomous questions are about social navigation skills. The understanding personality type is about self-awareness and awareness of others. The second to last bullet point, your professional needs, is about communication, growth mindset, and authenticity, all of those things. Julie, I see your comment. A good manager should be part of the team, not just the team leader. Yes. Oh my gosh, Julie. And the thing about empathy, I got to tell you, I was a much, much, much better manager after I had been fired once, after I had been laid off once. The empathy thing, I mentioned how bad my college career was, and that gave me so much deep empathy for college students, which is probably why I worked with college students successfully for so long. Uh, but so a good manager sees his, her, or themselves as part of the team, and is not afraid to roll up their sleeves. I have seen some amazing. There's a local historically black college, university called North Carolina A&T State University, top public HBCU in the country, really, and their chancellor sometimes is seen on campus with a lawnmower helping the grounds crew, and that definitely shakes up patriarchy, shakes up hierarchy, in a way that's can be meaningful. But yeah, we're all part of a team. Um, so going back to here, this is the question we just had. Here are a few other ideas I have. So for the invested manager, one of the things, and we didn't really mention how to manage those folks up, but for the invested manager, highlight them, celebrate them, talk to others about them, right? Because the other managers might need good examples. And so shining a light on those who are managing well is huge. And so we don't think about that because we're oriented towards what's the problem we need to fix, what's the manager who needs work, as opposed to we don't have to worry about that person. Well, sure, you don't have to worry about them. So tell that story and celebrate them. Even as someone, if they are not your manager, if they're one of your colleagues' managers, whatever, celebrating good management is an important part of building a culture that helps address not good management, right? For the average manager, invite them into conversations on how you can help each other grow, right? So again, the average manager, if you invite them into a conversation, how can I help you grow? How can I help me grow, right? For the average manager, most of them are going to be open to that conversation. And they might perceive that to be a conference, professional development, a workshop, a course, something like that. But demonstrating that you as the supervisee are invested in your growth and their growth, and that you expect the same back from them. Oftentimes, managees think the manager should be invested in their growth, but not the other way. And I did mention uncompensated labor, like the manager does get compensated for supervising you and helping you grow. But signaling this is about that servant leadership mentality. It's about leading rather than managing, right? Oriented towards a team. For the ego-driven manager, ask questions about the needs of your clients, customers, students, whatever you call those you serve, and team members with regularity with the we language, right? Many ego-driven managers think in me terms, me. And so many managers I've worked with, when I'm asking them about their practice, I can tell managers, when I'm doing like individualized leadership plans with managers, I can tell a big, bright dividing line between those who use I language and those who use we language. And those who use I language are telling a story often of how they are the champion of every story and the hero of every story, or sometimes a little self-effacing, depending on the context. The managers who speak in we terms in a way that's authentic, it's a different shift in how they conceive of what they are doing. And again, I would say that most of those folks who have the we mentality as a manager are really leading more than managing, because they recognize sort of the collective. So for the ego-driven manager, if your questions are constantly situated around the we, even though that person clearly might be me, when you ask them questions, how can we for our clients? How can we for our customers? How can we for our students, etc. Right? And so with the ego-driven manager, if they are again not toxic and not playing out their toxicity, framing things around the we questions is important, right? Um, and then for the toxic manager, sometimes y'all just hold on until it's not gonna, sometimes there's nothing to be done. If you have capacity, show copious amounts of empathy to that person while also inviting them to talk about healthy boundaries. For people who are in that trauma and or narcissistic space, you talking about your boundaries might not be relevant. But if you start getting them to talk about it, eventually they may round the corner in understanding that other people have boundaries as well. So we are getting close to the end here, and I want to be aware of our time. So here are some things that, some questions for reflection. And again, this will be up on the adaptivechallenge.com website later. Hopefully this afternoon. Worst case scenario, it'll be up by Friday. But here are a few questions that you can take with you. Reflect on your current and previous managers in ways that will make you better at leading and managing when it's time. In other words, if you're not a manager currently, or if you're a manager of one team but think you might have more robust management tasks in the future, survey the other managers that you have around you to create a greatest hits and a greatest misses list to try to incorporate those into your management style, your leadership style. And I've done this, and Myers-Briggs is another powerful way to, as a wedge into this, but reflecting on great managers you've had, average managers you've had, and not great managers, to build your future management and your future leadership. So rather than just what they've done, what can I do? Model emotional intelligence for your managers and others, right? Speak from your own experience. Many managers in power structures don't like conversations about privilege, identity, things like that. Normalize you talking about identities that make your life easier, identities that privilege you. If you're white, talk about being white. If you're a man, talk about being a man. If you're currently able-bodied, talk about that. Talk about the things that aren't talked about because they're conceived of by a power structure as the quote-unquote norms. Talk about them in broad daylight in front of managers and just make it normal to talk about. And then I mentioned this in one of the earlier slides. Use your privileged identities and or proximity to power structure. If you don't have a lot of privileged identities, but you happen to be golf buddies with the vice president, so to speak, right? But if you have all of these, to encourage emotionally intelligent leadership, to ask these critical questions. All right. So free webinar. I mentioned the course, so I'm not going to belabor that, but that is the coupon code if you're curious. But the next free webinar coming up is April 30th, 12 p.m. Eastern time. And that's going to be on emotional intelligence and intersecting identities. So we're going to go a little deeper on some of this conversation. Thanks, Lindsay, for that post. That's awesome. We're going to go a little deeper in this conversation about intersecting identities. And I mentioned that the next set of slides would be if we had time, but we are about 5 minutes away from finishing. So I'm just going to leave you with these to take with you, and then I'm just going to open up a Q&A thing. For discussion, what has been your favorite professional development experience, right? If managers are about the carrot and the stick, the reward and the punishment, and if professional development courses and conferences are about development and growth, what have been some of your favorites? Because can you encourage and invite managers and others into those as well? Are there adjacent professions with good conferences? I am blown away sometimes with maybe you're a hotel manager and you're in hospitality management on the hotel side, but you go to a conference of local coffee shop owners because you want to see how the coffee shop conferences talk about designing space, right? It's not hotels, but it's coffee shops, and it's adjacent, and so it can give you all kinds of fresh ideas. And also, are there books that you have found helpful that you can pass along to folks? By the way, speaking of passing along to folks, for other managers in your ecosystem, once this video is up, share it with them. I would love that to share. John, your question about toxic ageism. Ageism is a real thing. I will say this much, though, because ageism affects different ones of us differently. Men, in general, will deal with ageism within the last 10 to 15 years of our career. Women overwhelmingly in the United States will deal with ageism the last 10 to 15 years of their career and the first 10 to 15 years of their career, which if you're good at math, leaves only about, when you're 35 to 40, that is the lightest ageism for women. But the pay gap is in there as well. But I will say that ageism is real. But I will say that that men overwhelmingly report experiencing it towards the last 10 to 15 years of their career, whereas we know that for women in the workforce, it is on both sides of the bell curve. And I guess in theory, there's some little sweet spot where like women get 2 years of not dealing with it, and all the other years of their career they have to deal with it. But that might not even be true either. But just know that ageism is a real thing, but it does cut across specifically via different reports I've read and my experience as a consultant, cuts across gender specifically in a pretty big, bold way. Yeah, so I'll hang out for another few minutes, probably another 5-10 minutes. If anybody wants to hang out and just leave any other comments or questions, things you're thinking after this conversation, any questions for me? While LinkedIn is catching up, I'm going to tell you I've had some amazing managers. Probably my best leader of all time was Dr. Crispin Barr. She was one of the best. Dr. Adrian Israel was also one of the best. Different styles between those two, but two of the best. Jessica Terry Bergman was one of my best. And I had a manager named Dave who I sort of got to experience two Daves. It's through some weird circumstances that weren't his fault or weren't my fault. We each had extra duties during sort of my second half of my time with him that we didn't have during my first half. And so in my first half, I got to experience the awesome manager that he was. And then in the second half, because we both got thrown some curveballs, it wasn't the best fit going forward. But it wasn't him not being a good manager. It wasn't me not being a good managee. It was that our circumstances at that particular institution cut into our ability. Yeah. Alex, thanks. I'm glad you found it actionable. Yeah, John, the ageism thing. Yes, Eileen, great. Thanks for being here again. But yes, anyone else who wants to hang out, Beth, thanks for joining the conversation. I guess if you got MBA there, you read about the Peter Principle once upon a time, definitely. And for those of you who are still hanging out, I will tell you, my online course, like I said, it's 50% off right now. And it's just gonna be 50% off through the end of the month because I'm celebrating my 50th birthday, which is a big deal. And so I put a lot of heart and soul into that course, and I think people will get a lot from it. If you've ever seen me do my Myers-Briggs presentations at conferences or on a keynote stage, you usually get an hour or two. The last webinar was a little like an hour of that, but we're able to go so much more in depth with the course, and it's through the Teachable platform. But like I said, it's half off through the end of March. So definitely, if anybody's interested, check out that course. Thanks again, Lindsay, for posting the link. Any other questions or comments before we chime off for the day and enjoy the rest of our Wednesdays? Oh, and if you didn't see in the slide, it says special thanks to Lindsay, because Lindsay is a rock star of a virtual assistant. All right, friends. Well, keep in mind the next free webinar is coming up April 30th. It's about emotional intelligence and intersecting identities. And I hope to engage you then. Have a wonderful, wonderful Wednesday. Take care.